Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And when I started my company 18 years ago, that was the rock-solid bed of what we were going to do. We were going to be ethical to our customers, to our employees, to our vendors. We were going to go from just me to a multi-million-dollar multinational company. And it really wasn't too long after that whole thing started that I was doing some traveling and teaching with a coworker of mine, and we were riding along in his car, and he said something so degrading about Christians, about how stupid they were, and how idiotic that whole line of thinking was. And I sat there and I said nothing. And I immediately thought of Peter denying Jesus 3 times. And I said to myself, I think I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then it wasn't much later that I was working on a client site, and there was a guy there that I liked, but he made me so angry. And I went into his office one day, and I just chewed him out. And I sat there, I went back out to my cubicle, and I sat there, and I stewed, and sometimes when God taps you on the shoulder and he says, you know what you did, you went too far. And he said, you need to go and apologize. And so I said to myself, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I walked in and apologized. And that those were just 2 of the multitude of things that have happened to me in business over the years. I have been at the height of the mountain, like when Peter and James and John saw Jesus transfigured. We went from me to 20 employees. We had a couple $1 million revenue a year. I even had an experience where I walked into a client site and somebody came up to me and said, my name is, and I was like, great, nice to meet you. And he goes, I work for you. I didn't even know somebody who worked for me. But I've also been in the depths of despair. That 20 people turned back into just me. And along the way, I had a few partners who were right behind me all the way until they weren't behind me. And I've heard some very hurtful things about myself, about what a horrible person I am and how I couldn't lead anybody out of a paper bag, how I was unethical. And I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, what do I do to try to protect myself and to try to be that person that I think Jesus is calling me to be? Well, one of the things I've gotten to do over the past few years, which has been great, and Malcolm's actually been a part of it, is we've had a small group of Christian businessmen in Vienna that I meet with on a weekly basis. And sometimes we discuss business things, sometimes we discuss personal items. But I know that it's a group of guys that I can count on. And what's interesting is that there's a couple guys that are part of the group now that aren't Christians, but we always have a meal, and they always wait for one of the Christians to pray as a part of the meal. And I think to myself, what does God really want out of me? What does I can do all things through Christ strengthens me in my life, in my business life? What does that really mean? And the only thing that I can really come to as a conclusion is, I have to tell you a quick story. I know, Malcolm, I'm sucking up all the time here. Sorry. I have a great friend, and she said to me one time, she said, when I really started reading the Bible, and I just got on fire for God, she said, I read about King David and, all these prophets, and I was like, wow, I want their wisdom. And she said, I prayed and I prayed for wisdom. She said, all these horrible things started happening in my life. And she said, I went through about 2 years of just trials and tribulations that I could not figure out why God would put me through that. And then she said, towards the end of that, I looked at David's life again, and I realized that the only way that I gained that wisdom was through trials and tribulations. And she said, from that day forward, I've never prayed for wisdom again. And I think that it's inevitable that in this life, we're never finished. Right? We're always going to be gaining wisdom. It's the time, for me anyway, and I'll bet you might say the same thing, it's the time that you think that you know it all, that God's ready to teach you something. And so, I don't know if you want to take advice from me, but in terms of the church, I always think the church is a hospital for us sick people. It is not a temple for the righteous. And I try to keep reminding myself of all that all the time. And I also try to keep reminding myself that in my personal life, in my business life, in my church life, God's not finished with me yet, and I still have a few more